Hi everybody, it's your Human Anatomy and Physiology teacher, Mr. Poser. Today we are starting our fourth unit, which is on the skeletal system, which is just in time for spooky season. Halloween's right around the corner. Spooky skeletons. Alright, anyway, I like this unit. So what we're going to be talking about is the nature of bone, really, the cells, the tissues, how bone can remodel and repair itself. Then we'll get into the anatomy, what goes into a singular long bone. Then we'll get into the classifications of bones. And following that, we'll get into the skeleton and identifying the structure and function of various bones around the appendicular and axial skeletons. And we'll know what those terms mean later on as well. So without further ado, let's get started on our skeletal system. This is going to be a big unit. So as I was just saying, we're going to focus on four basic areas in the skeletal system. Talk about the nature of bone. That includes cells and tissues. We're going to talk about the skeleton itself. Then we'll discuss a little bit of cartilage, and at the end of all of this, we will talk about the kinds of joints that allow for the very precise motions in your body. The conjunction of muscle and bone and various types of connective tissue and cartilage that allow for precise motions. All right, but first let's get into the basics. Let's talk about just the overall structure, or excuse me, the function of bones. The first function of bone is obviously support. It holds you up. Without your skeletal system, you know, just be a blob of jelly. We got bones, right? Like most other, not most, all other vertebrates, we have some kind of skeletal structure. It protects us. It protects certain vital organs. So, for example, your rib cage is able to protect your lungs and protect your heart, which are vital organs. So, structure and protection are two vital functions of the skeletal system. There's a few more: movement, and here's the thing about this. It says each bone has a very specific shape, which often matches up with its neighboring bones. The place where two bones meet to allow your body to bend is called a joint. All right, so in conjunction with the muscular system, your muscles contract and relax, and what they do is they push and pull on bones, and where two bones meet, you can move it, and that is called a joint. Okay? Moving on from there, another structure, or excuse me, a function of bones that you may not know about is that bones are really good for storage of particular fats and minerals. So within the cavities and within what's called the yellow and red bone marrow, there's lots of different storage of molecules, and particular molecules that your body needs that are within your bones. And then finally, you may not know this, but blood is actually made by your bones. So your bones make your blood in a particular area called the red bone marrow, in the spongy tissue of a bone. That's where what's called erythropoiesis or hematopoiesis takes place, and that's the formation of red blood cells and white blood cells, in fact. So blood cells are made in the marrow cavities of certain bones. So you may not know that before. We want to dispel the notion that your bones are really just kind of like this dead structure, you know, and it's just a non-living component that just holds everything together. You know, we kind of get that idea because, you know, when we think of like dead people, you know, it's just their bones left, right? But your bones are very, very much alive. They're very active, and they serve a lot of different functions besides just holding you together and, you know, just being there. There's a skeleton inside you. Anyway, the nature of bone. So bone, we haven't discussed tissues quite as much as we have in past years this year, but we should know that bone is actually a type of connective tissue. And what makes it a type of connective tissue is the fact that bone is not just made of cells. It's made up of a combination of cells, particular fibers, and some substance called a ground tissue or a ground substance. Okay, so every connective tissue, whether we're talking about blood, or we're talking about dense regular, or we're talking about adipose tissue, or bone even, all of those are types of connective tissue. And all connective tissues have a living component and a non-living component. So there are cells that make up that kind of tissue, but in addition to those cells, there's also non-living tissue that kind of, serves its other functions. So for example, the non-living part of connective tissue is what we call the matrix of the tissue. And the matrix is made up of fibers and ground substance or ground tissue, and it's non-living. Okay, so think about this. A good example of how connective tissue kind of is. It's like Jello, right? Except if there's cells, it's like the kind of Jello that there's like fruit in it almost. Like nobody eats that anymore, and it's kind of gross. But just to kind of imagine that, like the fruit is the cells, and then just like this substance, non-living substance around it. That's kind of like what connective tissue is like. And obviously, bone is not consistent to Jello. Even though, fun fact, Jello is made from animal bones. I'll let that sink in for a second. While bone is not all wiggly like Jello is, it is still a type of connective tissue, and it kind of falls into the same category that is part non-living, part living. All right. So the matrix of bone is 25% protein fibers, such as collagen. Collagen is a very strong type of fiber that your body is able to produce, and 50% is mineral salt. And I bet you know what kind of mineral. If you've ever watched a commercial about milk or something, you probably know what mineral I'm talking about. So mineral salts provide strength and hardness to bone tissue, and that's something that we're going to be looking at later on. So let's talk about our 5 different types of cells that we can find in the skeletal system. We have osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, osteocytes, and then finally bone lining cells. But those top 4, each of which begins with the word osteo, those are going to be the most important ones that we'll talk about. So what do you think osteo means? Osteo is a Latin prefix, or it might be Greek, I don't know. But it's a prefix that means bone. All right, so osteocytes, that means bone cells. So what are these osteogenics and blasts and clasts? Well, we'll talk about that in just a second. Osteogenic cells are what we refer to as stem cells that develop from embryonic cells. So stem cells, long story short here, stem cells are basically cells that are not specialized yet, or they don't have a particular function, one specific function in the human body just yet. So as they mature and as they develop, they become more specialized so that they can serve that one function, right? Form meets function, once again. Osteogenic cells are responsible for forming new bones, and they develop into osteoblasts, which are another type of bone cell that we're going to talk about later on. That's the mature version of these cells. Osteogenic cells are the only types of bone cells that actually divide. So divide meaning that they are able to make a copy of themselves through mitosis, right? So they are the only mitotic bone cells. And osteogenic cells secrete a collagen matrix and calcium salts, so they are responsible for producing the non-living part of the bone tissue that surrounds them and makes a bone a bone. All right, so just a recap of what a stem cell here is. It's a mesenchymal stem cell. It's a primitive cell with the ability to differentiate into several different types of cells or different types of tissues. So yeah, it's a cell without a job yet. It's going to get a job. It just needs to grow up a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about osteoblasts. We talked about how osteogenic cells develop into osteoblasts. What do osteoblasts do? Osteoblasts are responsible for making new bones as your body grows along with rebuilding existing bones. Okay, so as you grow older, your bones get longer and you get taller up until a certain point. And throughout your entire life, your bones are remodeling themselves. It means that any damage that they sustain is, it's broken down and then it's rebuilt from the ground up throughout your entire life by the actions of these particular cells that we're going to be talking about, osteoblasts and their counterpart, osteoclasts. So osteoblasts can differentiate to become osteocytes as well. So osteoblast is still not a fully mature cell. An osteocyte is a fully mature bone cell. But an osteoblast is going to be building new bone. Blasts build. Blasts build. Both start with B. That's a good way to remember. So as I was saying, the counterpart of osteoblasts are the osteoclasts. And osteoclasts break down and reabsorb existing bone. They work with osteoblasts to reshape bones. So why would you ever want cells that break down your bones? Well, it's kind of like if you're remodeling a house, you kind of need to do some demo in order to put in the new furniture and make a more open concept, right? Uh, I've watched HGTV before. I know what I'm talking about. But you need to do some demolition before you replace all the old stuff with new stuff, right? So that's what osteoclasts are going to be doing. They break down old bone that might be damaged or it might be old or brittle or something like that. They break it back down so that osteoblasts can come in and produce new bone matrix to replace what used to be there. And then finally, osteocytes. These are the most mature bone cells. They are no longer going to divide. They're no longer going to differentiate into different types of cells. What they do, they are used for exchange of minerals and communicate with other cells in the area. So they kind of tell the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts what to do and when to do it. So they're kind of responsible for maintaining the structure of the bone and making sure, that they're not producing too much bone tissue or they're not taking away too much bone tissue. There's not too many osteoblasts or versus osteoclasts and so on and so forth. So if we take a look at this microscope slide here, hopefully we will look at some in person later on. These are these are called osteons, and this is what bone tissue kind of looks like. On each of these dark spots here, these are what we call an osteocyte, and it's in a lacuna, which is a kind of like just a pocket within that bone matrix for those cells to sit in. Okay, and then finally the last type of cell is called a bone lining cell, and bone lining cells cover inactive bone surfaces. And you can find them more in the adult skeleton. So as you age, your bone remodeling goes down less, and obviously you're not growing anymore, so you're not ossifying more cartilage tissue like what osteoblasts need to do. So you're going to find more bone lining cells in adults. Okay, so they kind of cover inactive or non-remodeling bone surfaces. That's what they do, and they're thinly extended. All right, so just a recap here of what our bone cells are. We got osteocytes that maintain the bone tissue, osteoblasts, they build the matrix, osteoclasts, they break it down. I can't think of a word that is synonymous with like breaking down that starts with the C. So let me know if you think of one. And then finally, an osteogenic cell is a stem cell that can develop into one of these other types of cells. Okay, so let's talk about bone tissue really quick, and then we'll wrap this up. As I've said a couple times, bone is a connective tissue, and it has a hardened matrix. And we can break down bone tissue into two main categories. It's compact or it's spongy bone. Compact or spongy bone. So compact bone, it's dense and it appears solid and smooth. In a long bone, which is a type of classification of bone that we're going to look at, basically it's like your radius or your ulna or humerus, any one of those are long bone. Compact bone tissue tends to make up the covering and the outside of it, while the other type, spongy bone, tends to make up the inside. So within a singular bone, the compact bone kind of surrounds an internal cavity, and that's where bone marrow is kept. And compact is, it's called compact because it's solid. There's not these air pockets, I shouldn't say air pockets, but there's not these holes in it like there are in spongy bone that we're going to see in a second. It's the hardest type, and it supports your body and muscles as you move. All right, so this is actually what compact bone tissue looks like. Bone is highly vascular, meaning that it's got a great connection to blood vessels. It's got an excellent supply of nutrients and oxygen. It's got a great way to get rid of its waste through these blood vessels. Okay, so bone is highly vascular. That's part of the reason why it heals so fast too. You can put on a cast, and you break a bone, you put it on a cast, it's gonna heal a few months later, simply because it has such a great connection to the cardiovascular system. All right, so this is the last thing I want to discuss here. Bone tissue. The other type is spongy bone, and hence the name. It has a spongy appearance. It kind of looks like this down here. It's a network of fused beams of that hardened calcium salt and collagen matrix. It's designed to be firm and strong, and it's designed to be compressed a little bit. It's designed to bear stress. All right. So it's found in the heads of long bones and joints and fills most of the irregular bones. And we're going to talk about what those are in our next video on our classifications of bones. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. I kind of went through this a little fast, so if you have questions, let me know, and we'll see you next time.